So let me start off first by just saying thank you. And thank you also to Mr. Noel Hahn, the National Cloud Computing Advisory Council Chairman. Thank you very much. And distinguished colleagues, it's a great opportunity to be here. Let me just try and paint a little bit of a picture. So I love this particular picture, and I want to try and share with you a little bit about why. Singapore aspires to be a smart nation. We want to be a smart nation, and I use the word specifically nation as opposed to city, because we are uniquely around the world a city-state, and Singapore is and will be the first smart nation. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how the role of cloud and data fits into that vision. But we think about this in terms of data relying on capturing and moving and interpreting all of that information. And what does that mean in terms of being smart as opposed to being technology savvy or wired? We think about this as a whole ecosystem. We think about this as universities and research institutes and social capital, in addition to the physical capital of physically being wired up. Now, data is something that we want to capture and use for the purpose of improving people's lives. Right? We want to find ways to always improve, and so we want to think about how data fits into that. Thankfully, Singapore is the Southeast Asia leader in terms of data centers, and we want to continue to build on that. Now, when I think of cloud and data, I think of three things. I think of volume of information, I think of velocity of information, and I think of value of what that information is going to be. Here's a quick example. On a recent flight, I was visiting with the UK trade and investment teams last week to talk about more investment coming into Singapore. And on the way home, looked out the window and saw the engine and was reminded that an engine on an A380 produces about 20 terabytes of information per engine per hour. So for everybody in the industry, you can do the easy math and say that's about 1 petabyte of data that's produced by the engines on an A380 every flight between London and Singapore. Now that's a lot of information, but without some way of interpreting it, it doesn't really mean anything. So the question then becomes, how do we interpret data like this in order to yield some outcome, some improvement? When we think about it, over the next 1 or 2 years, by some estimates, over 50% of all the data that's swirling around in the world will have to be stored or managed or kept in some way in a cloud-like environment. It's just simply too much in order for us to not think about the scalability that cloud offers. So in addition to thinking about the volume of data, I'm also thinking about the velocity of data. So when I think about the velocity of data, I think that in the time that it takes Usain Bolt to run the 100-meter dash, that Visa will have processed roughly 19,000 transactions. So when you think about velocity, being able to have a positive impact on whether that transaction is valid or not, what to do with that transaction, how to make sense of it in a meaningful business way, all of that has to happen for 19,000 transactions in less than 10 seconds. Day in and day out, 24 hours a day. That velocity of information simply is staggering to think about. The question now is, if I have massive volume of information and I have an amazing velocity of that information, what's the value that I can get out of that information? And the reason that I like to share this one, House of Cards, for those that have seen it or know of it through Netflix, is it's a great example of how the value of information can be used to make a business decision. So when you think about the television industry, you think of making a pilot, you put it out, you see what the audience reaction is. If it's positive, you make more episodes. At the end of the first year, you sign up for the second year. In this particular example, there was a pilot that was offered, but all the studios wanted to run it simply to see what the audience reaction might be. Netflix did a lot of analytics on all their viewer base, what was going to be attractive based on the actors, based on the storyline, and based on all that data with all the analytics, said, we think this will be a winner, and they bought 2 full seasons at the beginning. Now, what that allowed was all the actors to invest in making that program the best quality, because they did not have the uncertainty of one episode that may or may not be followed by any others. So uniquely in the model, a full 2 seasons was purchased up front based on the fact that analytics had been done to say this was going to be a success. So in this particular case, the value of the data unlocked a big winner, and it's gone on to prove to be a big success for the company. Now, in the middle of all of this, security has to play the most important angle. Despite all the volume and the velocity and the value of information, without security there is nothing else. Cloud especially relies on security and trust and the ability for people to say, I'll share that information with you. Now, the good news is cloud is accelerating in terms of adoption. But to continue to go forward with the enterprise users putting more and more mission-critical information, security has to be the number one concern. So, today we're announcing a new initiative that we're bringing out to the marketplace, initiated by IDA but driven by industry, which is around multi-tier cloud security standards in Singapore. So the MTCS is an initiative in which we had a whole group of people from Amazon and Salesforce, as well as industry organizations like SITF, SCS, many others, participating to help us think this through. More than 1,000 man-hours of time to evaluate and discuss and debate. There's 5 bodies that are now going through to qualify organizations that are interested to make sure that if you want to provide services through a cloud environment, here's some security standards that allow your users to know that they can be confident. We'll think about what those look like here in just a moment. We have Tier 1. Tier 1 is represented by this kind of basic lock. It's a basic level of security. You know that you have basic levels of protection for whatever information your cloud provider is providing. So that Tier 1 security is what we would consider to be the entry level. Then we go on and we have many locks that I like to represent through this, which is many different locks securing something at a higher level than Tier 1 can provide. Essentially, all of Tier 1 plus some additional security. So we have this, Tier 2. Then we have the highest level, which we would think of in the context of regulatory agencies that have a voice. So if it's in the financial industry, the healthcare industry, areas that are subjected to a lot of regulatory environments would have Tier 3 security. Now, Tier 1 and Tier 2 are ready now. Tier 3 is still under discussion with some of the regulatory bodies, and we will continue to work to refine that. But the regulatory bodies are with us, and this is where now the certification bodies are ready to work with anybody in the room to take your company forward to make sure that you are either level 1 or level 2. The reason that's important is that going forward, government-related cloud procurement is going to be expecting one of these standards to be achieved. For private sector, it's still voluntary, and any company will have to decide for itself how it wants to handle that. Why did we create MTCS, the Multi-Tier Cloud Security Standard? Because we want to bring confidence to the environment as best we can. Without security being a foundation, adoption of cloud may be less than we would love to see it be. So it's all about Singapore and cloud as being the trusted hub for all of Southeast Asia and ideally around the world. Why do we want to continue to think about these issues? Because we want to work on big initiatives like the one that I'm showing here. I've shown this slide in a few occasions, but I want to stress it once more. If I think about all of the different areas of healthcare and what affects all of us, aging and certain chronic diseases, the longer you live, the more chronic diseases you're going to be dealing with. So, in this context, 6 out of 10 people in Singapore die from chronic disease, meaning ongoing affliction. In this particular case, we think there are at least 2 that we can have a positive impact on with remote sensing. We would like to try and find a way to help with cardiovascular health monitoring and diabetic. So when we think about monitoring at the home to try and reduce the number of times a patient would come to the hospital, reduce the strain on the infrastructure, and ideally help with extended living and quality of life, we want to explore how sensors can make that possible. So from that perspective, this is one of the big initiatives that we're working on as IDA, together with our friends and colleagues in Ministry of Health and elsewhere. Here's an example of an innovative company that we would like to try and bring into this, and there's many more examples. MC10 is an organization working on this kind of very flexible, very lightweight sensor, and this is something that is very multi-purpose, from sending you an alert on your phone saying, drink more water because your body is not properly hydrated, through to you have responded from the infection properly and the post-operative care and many other examples. What we're trying to do is find ways to unlock more innovation for Singapore tech and Singapore research institutes to work on big problems that affect not only us, but also people around the world. So here's an example of what we want to do. So here's my request. Cloud security is important. Cloud and data centers and data give Singapore a competitive advantage across Southeast Asia, across Asia, around the world. The call to action that I would ask of all of our friends and colleagues in the room and outside, help us build tech. Help us build Singapore tech. Help us build tech use cases. Help us build tech talent. We want to get more people interested and excited about technology. We need your help. So it's an open-door policy. IDA is investing a lot of money into building new labs where we can tinker, explore, experiment with technology inside IDA and with partners in the research institutes and the education organizations. We would love everyone in the room to be a part of that. If you have an idea, you have something you're interested in, give us a call or send me a note. Somehow get involved in helping us build. So we want to build Singapore talent, build Singapore tech, because we want Singapore to be a smart nation. We need your help to do that. I'm looking forward to being a part of the event. Thank you very much for your time this morning.